Okay, today we're going to talk about 26.2, the New Deal. If you remember correctly, we talked about Franklin Delano Roosevelt is going to end up being the next president. So here's a little bit of background information on him. You'll notice his name's Roosevelt, and we've already talked about Teddy Roosevelt or Theodore Roosevelt being the president. So he is related, although he's a far cousin, so he's not very close. What's funny about this is he actually married Teddy Roosevelt's niece, Eleanor Roosevelt. So she got married to him and she didn't even have to change her name, right? So that's interesting. So they're distantly related. Okay, and so he got polio actually. He was active in politics and everything, and he was had a pretty promising career, and then he got polio. And nowadays we have a shot so that people don't get it, but back then he ended up having trouble with his legs and getting paralyzed. So he either was in a wheelchair or he sometimes wore braces. And he kind of tried to hide it, and not make it obvious. So you'll see sometimes pictures of him and things where he's kind of, leaning against something. And that is because he's having trouble standing. And he asked photographers even to not take his picture while he was in his wheelchair or his braces, to kind of make sure that people in America like still had confidence in him, right? So he didn't look weak or anything. Anyway, so he becomes governor and then eventually president in 1932. And remember, he comes in the times that, economy is really poor and people are struggling, right? And they haven't been happy with how the previous president has been dealing with things. So he listens to a lot of advisors about what he should do to try to help the economy. Those advisors are nicknamed the Brain Trust. And he comes in and he has all these plans for he ran on a platform of I'll help the common person, right, who's been, they called it the forgotten man, who's been at the bottom of the economic pyramid. And they really he said he was going to help them, right? So one of the big speeches he gave was people were very nervous about the economy and banks didn't trust the banks and things like this. So he says in a famous speech, this quote that you've probably heard: "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Okay, so he had this big plan of trying to turn around the economy, and in the first 100 days. And if you pay attention to the news, you'll hear that phrase used a lot nowadays. Every president, the first 100 days are really important, trying to kind of set off your agenda and what you're going to try to get done. Okay, and so he immediately got passed through Congress something called the Emergency Banking Relief Act, to try to help the banks and to make people feel like banks are safe. And he went on telling people about that, don't worry, the banks are good now, we've helped them and you can afford to put your money in there, and trying to convince people it's safe. And so he did these radio broadcasts, which got to be called fireside chats, and he would use them to keep talking to the people, and to try to assure them things are going to get better. And you can see there's a picture of him next to his fireplace, right? That's why they called them that. Okay, so what does he do? Well, all his programs he put into place together are called the New Deal. And he put in a lot of work relief programs. Work relief is an idea of like giving jobs to the people who need them, right? So one of them was called the Civilian Conservation Corps. By the way, if you see Corps, CORPS, kids sometimes say corpse. It's actually just core. And I know it looks like it isn't, but think of it like silent letters, okay? And so anyway, this group is going to do things that are good for the environment, right? Planting trees, um, building levees to keep flooding from, ruining things, improving national parks. So he is, helping everyone, right? But he's also giving jobs to people, okay? Federal Emergency Relief Act was another one that was going to give money to state programs to help give people the food and other help that they need, right? Because so many people have been out of work and are basically starving. The Agricultural Adjustment Act is helping farmers, right? And this is kind of a controversial one. He wants to remember we talked about how farm prices have gone way down because there's too much food, right? And there's not enough people to buy them. So the prices of having too much stuff makes, right, supply and demand, and makes it go down. So they actually paid farmers to destroy their extra crops and milk and livestock. And of course that, the idea is to have less available so the prices go up. And that makes sense, but although, right, it seems very shocking, right? Like, can you imagine? It seems like such a shame to ruin all that food, especially when there are people starving, right, at this time. So it's kind of shocking idea. They also started paying farmers to not use some of their land, don't even farm some of it. And they're paying them to do that so that they can afford to live. But it also solves the problem of not having too much food. And so these are called subsidies when you get some kind of payment. And so they would pay them money to make up that difference of what they would have gotten if the market had been right. So making up that difference in price. All these different programs are helping, and within a few years, farmers' incomes do rise about 50%. So it kind of does work, although it was very it was controversial, and it was getting very involved, the government. And there was a Supreme Court case eventually in 1936 that said that this was unconstitutional, having this group do all these things. So actually they had to stop eventually. Another program was called the Tennessee Valley Authority. This is focusing, like the map shows you, on the areas around Tennessee, the Tennessee Valley. And again, it was very important work because they built a lot of dams that controlled flooding, and the dams also were used to generate electricity. And this is a very poor area, and a lot of people did not have electricity in their homes at this point. So by building these dams and providing this energy, people for the very first time are getting electricity. So it is really great, these programs. The only thing is that some people got critical because, this is, federal government money being used, and it's only helping this one little area. So some people didn't like that their taxes and things were not helping everyone. Also, the power companies didn't like it because the government is now getting involved in providing energy, and that is saying like that's kind of a socialist view, that the government is going to take over industries that normally are privately run. So there were some critics there. There was the National Industrial Recovery Act, which was trying to help the economy by encouraging businesses to do it themselves. It's an interesting idea. They have the government agency, but they don't want to tell them what to do. They're kind of like going to push them to do, but businesses to do the right thing. So there was something called the National Recovery Administration, a group underneath there that they were going to basically, encourage highly businesses to do things that were good, like setting a minimum wage, abolishing child labor. They even had another agency called the Public Works Administration, where they were going to make groups of jobs basically to help people, but also that would help everybody, right? So building roads and hospitals and schools and shipyards and things. And so not only did it put people back to work, but it also did things that were good for kind of everybody. So that's going to help the economy, right? If people are working And a lot of these other things are going to help the economy too, right? If you have roads going to places that there weren't before, or improving. They also had the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC. You may notice that that is still around, and it's listed on like bank doors and things if you ever look. What this is, remember, banks had failed, right? Because people were so nervous about them and pulling out their money. So what they did to try to boost up the belief in them is that they guaranteed that the government would cover up to $2,500 of yours, even if the bank failed. You wouldn't lose that. Now, that doesn't sound like too much today, but remember, with inflation, it would have been worth a lot more back then. And so they're trying to say, don't worry, we're backing this bank. And so, trying to get people to go back to using the banks. Also, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, again, still something used today, is trying to get people to be confident again in the stock market, right? Because the stock market went bad. This group is going to oversee all those deals of stocks, and they also have the power to punish if they find people abusing it. And so that's true today. If they find insider trading and things, that they can actually give jail time to people who are breaking the rules. Okay, so all those different programs, how did they do? Well, they did not cure everything, of course. There's a long period of depression, and it's hard to get out of that. But there were some things, did help some, but we still have high unemployment. We still have, farmers who can't end up making enough to survive and end up, having to lose their land to pay off their debts. But things start improving, and people start to feel a little bit more confident in the economy, and we do see, money going back into the economy, and things are starting to get a little better.